Younger voters came out in record numbers in 2015 to help Justin Trudeau win a majority government. But since then, their support for the Liberals has faded. Millennial and Gen Z voters could make up close to half of the electorate in the next campaign, and that has the Prime Minister and members of his caucus trying to find new ways to win them back. Ashley Burke has the story.
Just try to come around further away from the camera.
These Gen Z staffers work for Employment Minister Randy Boissonnault, but in this case, they're calling the shots.
And then am I smiling or am I just walking by you?
I'm going to say with confidence you're walking away.
They're directing social media videos that could hit with millennials and Gen Z like this.
I'm working late.
The Liberals have heard from young Canadians they want authentic politicians. This is one way they're trying to win trust.
Got to have some videos that are fun, that maybe are edgy, but that also say to people, I'm real.
It's all part of a new push to reach younger voters. Mary Ng bought her own drone to bring on international trips. MP Nate Erskine-Smith just hired a filmmaker to produce his content.
It's answering the questions that they have, speaking to the issues that they have on platforms that they are on.
Trudeau's Liberals need to win the support of Canada's largest voting demographic or risk losing the next election.
Right now, the Liberals are in the worst position they've been in with millennial voters and Gen Z voters.
That support, he says, drifted to the Conservatives, who are reaching them where they get their news, on social media, and talking about their issues.
You want to be able to afford rent? Then you have to vote for Pierre Poilievre.
In the last year, the Liberals have pivoted with housing announcements and a budget focused on younger Canadians.
To ensure fairness for every generation.
But how do you get that message to younger voters who don't watch traditional news?
We got to meet Canada's Deputy Prime Minister and
talk to content creators, including Danica Nelson. She says creators like her with thousands of followers are a way to reach this generation.
They want to meet people where they are, and they know that people are on social media.
Wait, don't scroll. This is important.
The Prime Minister's office is also sharpening its social media game, doing more interviews with podcasters and making more videos explaining policy.
You may have heard of the capital gains tax.
That video getting millions of views, but whether that translates into trust and votes is too early to tell. Ashley Burke, CBC News, Ottawa.
So how has that Liberal strategy been working? Well, new numbers from Abacus data show some success. In April, the poll found the Liberals 19 points behind the Conservatives in that 18 to 29-year-old demographic. Well, compare that to this week's Abacus survey. It shows that gap has now closed within 4 points. We're going to talk about that with the Friday Power Panel. Marty Patrickin is the Quebec correspondent for The Logic. There he is. Marie Vastel is an editorial writer for Le Devoir. The CBC's Jason Markusoff is in Calgary, and here with me in studio, journalist and author Paul Wells. Marie, I'm going to go out on a limb and say you're the youngest and closest to the Gen Z and Millennials here on this conversation. I know, Paul. I know. Millennial writer Paul Wells.
I didn't want to insult anyone, but I assumed I was. Yes.
Yeah, no, I think it's a safe bet. What do you think of this? I mean, look, we've seen some interesting data this week. The challenges for the Liberals are still large, but they are going after some of these voters in the arena where these voters are. What do you make of this move?
I mean, the strategy is very obvious, and Ashley exposed it well in her story. The Prime Minister, has been doing a lot of social media posts. He's doing a lot of podcasts as opposed to speaking to us in traditional media. This influencer that she interviewed, it was the second year actually that the government invited influencers to the budget lockup. So there is this very purposeful strategy to go after these voters. And it does seem tentatively, because it's only 2 polls now, that the Conservative lead is narrowing for those 18 to 29-year-olds, so Gen Zs. But I also noticed in David Coletto's poll that the 30 to 44-year-olds, so essentially millennials, my cohort, I guess, I'm one of the older millennials, borderline millennial, because I'm a little bit too old, but the Conservative lead is still 22%. And that cohort, which probably votes a bit more than the younger one, that lead doesn't seem to be narrowing, and they represent 23% of the Canadian population. So I think there might be movement within the youngest of voters, and that's probably good news for the Liberals because they've been putting a lot of effort into that, but they might want to look at 30 to 44 because those are still quite very much looking at the Conservatives as opposed to the Liberals right now.
Well, right, and Jason, that's part of the challenge, right? Is that the 18 to 29, in terms of like when you're counting on not only who will vote for you, but who will actually vote. I'm not trying to stereotype, but history shows us the younger the voter, the less likely they are to show up on election day.
No, and in 2015, they tried to give these people reasons to vote. They promised to legalize marijuana, which they did, and they tried to end first past the post voting and bring in proportional representation, which I don't think they did.
No, I'm pretty sure we've had a couple of elections.
Pretty sure they did not do that. Unless I missed something in the news. What's going to be the value proposition for this group now? Is it going to, I think that there's the real potential. The reason we've seen Pierre Poilievre gain on them is because he's driving people's frustrations and negativity. And unless you're offering something big and shiny, negativity is much easier to sell than capital gains tax or a scattershot number of affordability and housing policies. So Pierre Poilievre has, there are some big motivators, big drivers behind what Pierre Poilievre has been doing in his success with younger, 18 to 29s and the millennials. And somehow the world has given me the fact that I am a gray-haired 40-something millennial, because that's the way the world, the demographic chain works. And people who cannot afford houses are not going to be so moved by pretty much anything on social media that can't dissuade them of that fact.
Well, Marty, I'm a no-haired 50-something Gen Xer. So the older the voters right now, the more angry they kind of are with the government right now. But the millennials, they can buy that legal marijuana now, but they're struggling to buy that house. And that seems to be, marketing's one thing, it's results, right?
Yeah, that's exactly it. And Jason hit on it right there. This whole TikTok Taylor Swift kind of housing stuff is so cringy, like to watch for myself. But I mean, it's sort of the sound of them going back to the well. What they did in 2015 and onwards is always going back to try to get that voter demographic back. The problem is there have been two very good books written about Mr. Trudeau, one of which was written by Paul Wells, who's on the panel today, that makes very clear that throughout the years, the PMO, specifically the organization around the Prime Minister, has become reactive, and they were reactive on housing. And you can read it. 2015, we will make it easier for Canadians to find an affordable place to call home. They said that in 2015. This goes on and on and on. They did not address the issue until it started hurting them politically. And this is the fall that we're seeing right now. There is no value proposition in TikTok videos and that kind of thing if people cannot afford a place to live. The very fact that I can take my own situation, I would not be able to afford the place I live in 10 years onward. And I just imagine someone that's coming into the housing market right now and having someone on TikTok or having an influencer telling me how great Justin Trudeau is will not change the facts on the ground that if simply I cannot afford a place to live, let alone buy a place.
Before we get to author Paul Wells, as you rightly pointed out, I just want to show the overall horse race numbers, control room, if we can get that graphic, because this is from the Abacus data. So like we showed you the number that showed they're within 4 points in that 18 to 29 group. The overall horse race numbers still has a pretty big Conservative lead. It's, it's 16 points there. Paul, the NDP, is still holding steady at around 18 percentage points. That's an improvement for the Liberals over the last numbers, but still a pretty daunting task.
At the beginning of the year, the aggregator 338 Canada showed a 13-point advantage for the Conservatives, so smaller than today. And that translated in their projections to majority plus 20 seats for the Conservatives. The Conservatives getting more than twice as many seats as the Liberals. So directionally for the Liberals, they must be encouraged. We'll see whether it holds, and we'll see whether those trends continue. I can guarantee you that gap between the Conservatives and Liberals will either narrow or widen or stay the same.
Right. Well, that's why he writes books, folks. Yeah. All right. Well, I'm not sure how to follow that, but look, one of the things we've seen from the Liberals, other than where they're putting the message, is the message they're trying to sell, and they're trying to move the conversation of this election from the odds, which we've just shown, to the stakes, which is what they want people to think about. So they want people to think about the issues. So the Prime Minister was in Nova Scotia today to try to emphasize what they're doing on pharmacare, to get some attention on that. But have a look at what happened after reporters finished asking him the questions they had.
Thank you. That concludes today's press conference.
Any questions on pharmacare or the announcement we're making today that matters deeply to Canadians?
Okay, that sort of highlights one of the challenges there, because those comments come as more Abacus polling on Liberal programming's found how people feel about these choices. 72% of Canadians say if the Conservatives win the next election, a Poilievre government should not end the Liberals' national dental care program, but 43% believe a Poilievre government will end the program. The same with having a serious plan to address climate change. 80% say the Conservatives should have one, and yet almost 50% say they believe Poilievre won't have one. So, Marie, we have this contradiction that voters are telling pollsters, we don't necessarily want to see a massive shift in the policy direction of the federal government. We just want to see a shift in who is in the federal government. How did the Liberals come back on that?
Well, what was also interesting in those numbers is that the proportion of people who thought the Conservatives would or would not, would keep or would get rid, was pretty even, which means people actually don't know what he's going to do. And fair enough, he hasn't told us. But so people don't know what he's going to do. And that is also an opportunity, I think, for the Liberals to try and portray it as though a Conservative government would get rid of what you want to keep or wouldn't bring in what you want to see, like a climate change plan. So there is opportunity, but the same poll also shows that 30% of people who say they would vote for the Conservatives today didn't vote for the Conservatives in 2021, and that the negativity or the negative view of the Prime Minister is still close to 60%. So there is a very big desire for change, a very big sort of tiredness with the Prime Minister, if I can use that word. And so it makes it that much harder to convince people, one, that the Conservatives would do what the Liberals want to sort of shake as a scary scarecrow, and then convince them that they should stick with someone they're tired of because he's been there for 10 years. So there is opportunity, but it seems pretty slim to me. And just to go back real quick on the youth vote, there's a reason that the Liberals are going after it so hard, is that 10 of the youngest ridings of the population of the I'll say that again. 10 of the ridings with the youngest population, 7 of those are Liberal seats. And they're important seats. There's Stephen Guilbeault, Mark Miller, Chrystia Freeland. So there's a reason they're also trying to save those seats, because they have a lot of them.
So, Paul, all of those numbers we just showed, they can either get better, get worse, or stay the same, just like the other numbers. But one that shows why the Liberals are raising the abortion issue so profoundly is that 41% of Canadians say people polled believe it'll be more difficult to access abortion under a Poilievre government. This is the issue they're really trying to get them on.
There's a reason why Liberals keep going back to some familiar themes, is because the familiar themes often work. Abortion, gun control, and the notion of private medical care. It's interesting that this week the government of Quebec appointed a new healthcare reform panel whose chairman comes from the private sector. The CEO of the new healthcare reform panel comes from a private healthcare consortium. If that had happened under a Conservative government, Liberals would be screaming blue murder. But I mean, as I was saying before,
they're kind of a Conservative government in Quebec, though.
Yes, I mean under a Conservative federal government. As I was saying before, I digressed so ridiculously. There's a reason why Liberals use these themes, is because they work. I mean, they shut Erin O'Toole down in 2021 largely on a gun control issue that I think for most Canadians was not that germane, but for Canadians on both sides of that issue who vote based on the policy direction, they didn't like what they heard from O'Toole, and so the Liberals kept hammering that.
Marty, what do you make of this dynamic that a lot of people say they want consistency on a lot of the policies? They don't want Poilievre to get rid of things that he says he may get rid of, that they believe he will get rid of, but they definitely want change in terms of who is running the country right now.
I think the change thing is key in that. When you're tired of when a person covers a lot of sin for someone like Poilievre. If there's a change mandate within the electorate, that not much can stop that. The one thing I would say about that poll, though, and Susan Delacourt pointed it out in her column today, it removes the undecideds, and we have to remember that likely talking about a smaller percentage. Look, we are in a fishbowl sitting on this panel right now because we talk about this and we think about this sort of thing a lot. It's a year and a half away, and the fact remains is that a lot of people aren't really listening to a lot of this because it's noise, and we're going into the summer. The other aspect is just to touch on what Paul was saying is that I think that's exactly right. I think, you know, for the last 4 election cycles, we've had a variation on a theme. That is to say, the Liberals say that CPC has a hidden agenda. The Liberal Trudeau government is sort of, or the party is sort of depicted as this sort of woke spendthrift monolith or whatever. And it looks like we're going to have the exact same thing this time around with a lot more salty language.
Yeah, but Jason, I think Poilievre is going to be a tougher target on that because whether you like what he says it very bluntly and very plainly. And like on the abortion, he's like, nope, not doing it. Not going to do anything on abortion no matter what happens. And I am going to do all of these things that I believe in, whether you like them or not, which is kind of what we're seeing in these numbers as well. It's going to be, the hidden agenda thing may be tougher to do.
I mean, and the Conservatives have learned, and Poilievre has certainly learned from the lessons of the past, from what troubled Harper, what troubled Andrew Scheer, what troubled Erin O'Toole. So, and you know, it's been plain as day that eventually the Liberals were going to go to the abortion. Well, I think there was Campbell Clark's very good piece in the Globe that talked about it. They're doing it this soon, 18 months out from an election. Isn't that the last card you? Isn't that the last card you play? And so we'll see how effectively they can play something like that, you know, consistently over the course of the next year and a half. I mean, but when you look at all these things that they're doing, that we're talking about, playing up their budget issues, trying to court youth vote, trying to you know, drive down his negatives on things like abortion, threaten, you know, warn people that you're going to lose, you're going to lose, you know, new entitlement programs like pharmacare and dental care. It just speaks to the fact that the Liberals have so much ground to try to make up, and they have to do so many different things to try to get a 20-point deficit down to 16 points, down to 0. I mean, 0. You know, it just seems so difficult and so challenging at this point. I was looking back earlier today at the 1993, the polling ahead of 1993, the big Mulroney and Kim Campbell losing election. They were, you know, again, they were behind for more than 2 years, and deeply behind for, you know, consistently. There was a little blip toward the end, right before the election. Why? Because Mulroney said he was resigning, but then poll went back down for the Tories, and the Liberals won big. And you know, we're seeing some movement here and there. We'll see what you know, what all they can shake out. You know, even with a new leadership after this long.
Paul, I just want to.
Can I just say?
Go.
Can I just jump in quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, thanks. Just on the abortion issue, he has been clear what his government would bring forward, but his entire caucus also just voted for a bill that some would categorize as pro-life because it brings in this notion of harming a woman as a aggravating factor. So he's been clear, but there's also wishy-washy signals on gun control. It's not that clear what he would do. So I would say there's nuance on the issues that the Liberals are trying to push forward. It's not that clear what the Conservatives would do. But where I do agree with you is that it's been 10 years, and I don't think people are scared as easily. And I very much remember 2015, that election where the Conservatives and Mr. Harper threw everything they could at the wall to see if it would stick, and no one would listen to them. At the doors, candidates said no one would listen to them anymore, and that is the biggest risk that they're facing.
But Paul, where I was going to go with the whole attempt to sort of drag Poilievre into these debates. I listened to your podcast conversation this week with Andrew Lawton, who's just written the book on Pierre Poilievre, and I've read some of the excerpts from his book, which I'm going to read this weekend. But he makes the point that he's just not going to engage on these issues with traditional media the way Andrew Scheer tried to do it, and the way that you know, Erin O'Toole tried to do it, to sit down and have conversations on it. He's either not going to do the interviews, or he's just going to bluntly say, I am not going to do that, full stop, leave it there. And he's not going to sit down with somebody like me and do 10 minutes on that topic, right? So it's going to be tougher to pull him into it.
Questions exist whether he answers them or not.
Right.
I have seen more Conservative opposition leaders lose since the turn of the century than I have seen win. And typically the past doesn't predict the future. Stephen Harper won even you know, in defiance of these trends, and Pierre Poilievre is doing very well in the polling. But we tend these days to mystify and mythologize communication strategies. But people think for themselves, and we can't really affect that process. And I'll tell you a secret, neither can the politicians.
Right. Okay. All right. Okay. Speaking of politics, Marty, you got a quick thought?
Yeah, just quick, just to follow up on that. The one difference I would say was sheer. Certainly, I mean, we're going back to a little bit to what the way that Harper reacted to a lot of this stuff. He was able to keep his caucus in order. We had the blip of Scheer and O'Toole, who looked like they had something to hide. On gun control, he actually came out in the platform and then reversed himself during the election. Scheer, I still remember that day. He was in the French debate, and the flop sweat on his face. It was an election that was basically going up against an incumbent, and it was the focus was on him. It'll be very difficult to do that with Poilievre because he doesn't. There's no backing down. There's nothing. He's not going to go. Oh well, no, or change mid course. What you see is what you get. Not to exactly. There you go.
Yeah. Okay. Look, one last quick thing I wanted to get in because it's an interesting little story. And Jason, maybe you got on this. Earlier today, our colleagues at Canadian Press, I believe it was Steph Taylor, broke the story that the independent MP, Kevin Vuong, who was dropped from the Liberals in the middle of the 2021 election over his failure to disclose a withdrawn sexual assault charge, he's written Pierre Poilievre and he's asked to join the Federal Conservative Caucus, and the Federal Conservatives have said no. It's interesting because if a Toronto MP had asked to join them in the past, maybe, but because of this baggage, what do you make of this, Jason? The Kevin Vuong trying to get in and then saying not a chance.
I mean, the baggage is obviously the thing that would create easy ammunition for a party that's really trying to, shore up its vote and popularity among women, which tends to, be one of the Liberals' core party strengths. So that would be a reason. The other reason, I wonder the extent to which it would be that this isn't a government, this isn't a party that wants to bring in Liberals, that wants to openly court provincial or federal Liberals. They even grow weary of some provincial Conservatives and the provincial Conservatives of various stripes. I don't think they would take anybody from BC United with much of a Liberal brand to them. I guess they have a few, but not much. So to get somebody who's a federal Liberal in, unless they were, some remarkable star, turncoat, that may be a hard swallow, especially given how some of the, we're seeing so many frustrations within Conservative nomination ranks in the GTA.
Okay. Gang, we're out of time. I appreciate it. Paul, you want to show that book? He's not here, but Nigan Sinclair has a new book. There it is. Paul brought it with him because...
It's about Winnipeg. It is beautiful writing, and it's tough, just like Nigan.
Okay, so there you go, folks.
Jason, we need to write books. Jason and I need to write books now.
We'll have you on the show. All right, gang, got to say goodbye. Marie Vestel, Jason Markusoff, Marty Patrickin, and Paul Wells. Thanks so much, gang.